I wasn't planning to make this video, but in light of recent events, I felt it was necessary to shed some light on one of the lesser known functions of the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, that of conservation. To be honest with you, I myself didn't know much about USAID, including its conservation functions, until it popped up in the news recently as one of the first and largest casualties of the new Trump administration's government efficiency efforts. Keeping that in mind though, this video isn't going to talk about every single aspect of USAID. It's an enormous agency with critical functions related to global public health, economic development, disaster relief, education, and yes, conservation. I'm not qualified to speak to you about most of those things, which is why I won't be covering them. But I do know about conservation. I do know about national parks, and I know just how important and beneficial they are to the people, communities, and ecosystems that rely on them. I know how important conservation is to ensuring we have clean air and water, food, medicine, housing, protection from natural disasters. Every aspect of our lives and the lives of everyone around the world relies on a healthy environment in some way. And here in the United States, we have the best national park system in the world, and we have some of the most robust and expansive environmental and conservation laws in the world. In part, through USAID, we have exported these ideas and values and frameworks around the world to countless countries so that they and we can benefit from them too. So, here are just a few examples of how USAID benefited national parks and conservation around the world. First up, we head to Colombia, where a $40 million USAID grant went toward funding sustainable ecotourism in areas previously impacted by guerrilla occupation and terrorism, including an area which contains an ancient city that is older than Machu Picchu. Specifically, this aid targeted those former guerrilla fighters and trained them to actually become nature guides instead, which not only stabilized the region from violence, but provided new economic opportunities, both of which reduce the pressure to migrate to places like the United States. Or, as the New York Times put it, quote, "National parks have proved to be a stabilizing force for countries around the world, creating local businesses and jobs, protecting fragile ecosystems, and kickstarting tourism efforts and other economic opportunities. Communities around parks and preserves often benefit from new or improved health services and schools. The financial benefits may diminish the need for local people to migrate, either internally or overseas," end quote. Moving on to South Asia, USAID funding in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh has seen all of those countries increase their populations of tigers. Globally, since 2010, the year USAID started funding tiger conservation efforts, tiger populations have grown by more than 75%. Nepal has tripled its population of tigers. Bangladesh has been able to resolve 100% of its reported human-tiger conflict cases, and India has established new tiger protected areas. Again, all as a result of USAID funding. In Mozambique, Gorongosa National Park is thriving. After a 16-year civil war, the country was reported to have lost 95% of its large mammal population. But USAID funding was used to restore wildlife populations and habitats in more than 1.6 million acres of Gorongosa National Park. That park is now home to more than 100,000 animals, a 700% increase from just a few decades ago. Gorongosa has had particular success leveraging USAID funding with its philanthropic partners, particularly the Gorongosa Project. In one instance, an initial $5 million USAID award was turned into over $25 million through matching donations and other private fundraising. That money was then used to hire hundreds of rangers for the park, provide veterinary care to animals in the park, and provide food and education to the local youth. And as an added benefit, the protection of Gorongosa has actually had a corresponding impact on international criminal activity. According to Greg Carr, founder of the Gorongosa Project, quote, "There are 4 international criminal enterprises that are closely entwined: human trafficking, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and exotic wildlife trafficking. It is often the same groups involved in all 4, end quote. By funding conservation in Mozambique, USAID and the additional funding enabled by it has correspondingly impacted global wildlife trafficking and other illegal trafficking activity. Staying in Africa, USAID was instrumental in getting the entire Gabonese national park system even off the ground. Gabon is home to more than 54 million acres of the Congo rainforest, itself the second largest rainforest on Earth after the Amazon. And in 2002, Gabon set aside more than 7 million of those acres, 11% of its entire land area, in 13 different national parks. USAID funds were then used to facilitate the U.S. National Park Service to act as a consultant on the establishment, administration, and management of those parks, something it has done for numerous countries around the world. The Park Service's involvement here helped to legitimize and strengthen these parks, giving them a solid foundation from which to launch an effective conservation effort. And the Park Service got something in return here as well. So this project actually directly benefited the US national parks as well. NPS officials were particularly interested in seeing a new national park system, quote unquote, start from scratch, and they wanted to learn how they could use novel approaches to management and supervision from a country that was creating a national park system for the first time. And finally, we move to Guatemala, where USAID funds have been instrumental in a successful community conservation project in the Maya Biosphere Reserve. Certain areas in the reserve were set aside as what are called community concessions, where local communities and organizations in those areas, instead of a strict preservation mandate, were actually allowed to sustainably harvest forest products. So, of course, timber, but also things like fruit, nuts, and fibers. They were then allowed to sell those products and generate income from the sustainable use of the forest. Over the time period this effort has been in place, areas of the reserve with community concession tracts in place have actually seen lower rates of deforestation than areas of the reserve with more strict pure preservation regulations. Over a period of about 22 years, deforestation rates have decreased over an area of about 1 million acres on which community concession tracts have been in place. The research has consistently shown that when communities are allowed to benefit and profit from forest products, they are much more likely to take care of that forest and manage it sustainably. 2013 to 2020, this program created more than 23,000 jobs, generated more than $52 million in sales from forest products, and led to investment in local schools, healthcare infrastructure, and scholarships, not to mention, again, the program's success in tackling deforestation. And like in Colombia, these economic opportunities have led to decreased rates of outmigration from this part of Guatemala compared to Guatemala overall, which sees a lot of outmigration to the United States. Similar community-led conservation efforts have been funded by USAID in Indonesia, the Philippines, Namibia, Kenya, and Ecuador. And these projects also just scratched the surface. I read about USAID providing funding for the restoration of coral reefs in the Seychelles, the creation of Song Tan National Park in Vietnam, and the establishment of new marine protected areas in Papua New Guinea. I'm sure there's more, but I actually can't access the USAID website right now to learn more about their entire program. So a lot of what I just told you actually was reported on by Alexander Woolley at the New York Times, and then I filled in the gaps where I could with non-government websites. Links to that story and all of my sources are in the description down below. And yeah, there you have it. Just a few of the conservation and national park projects funded and supported by USAID over the years. I hope you've learned something from this and now have a greater appreciation for the role the United States plays in global conservation and ultimately how these projects do actually benefit Americans. I'm expecting the comments to be fun on this one, so if you are planning to comment down below, just keep it civil down there, guys. I've built this community on constructive, level-headed conversations and discourse, and I do plan to keep it that way. So I will be monitoring the comments for knuckleheads. We'll just put it that way. If you like my work and want to support me further, I do have a Patreon with all sorts of great value perks, Discord, trip reports, AMAs, director's commentaries, all that sort of stuff. Direct support over there is always much appreciated if you are able. You can also go give me a follow over on Instagram for pretty pictures and to keep up with my park travels. That's usually the place where I'm posting about where I'm going to be first. And yeah, that's all I have for you. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.